All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. My name is CJ Wright. I'm here with Amit Mehta, who's our Director of Product Management, and today we are going to be going over policies and packages, best practices, along with troubleshooting. And towards the end of the session today, we're also going to spend some time going over agent deployment troubleshooting. So with that in mind, there are plenty of opportunities to ask questions throughout this. Please feel free to use the chat within GoToMeeting to post your questions. We'll be taking those towards the end, but there's no reason to wait until the end to ask the questions. We're happy to take those as they are asked. And we'll provide answers along the way, either through myself or some of the individuals that are assisting in the background with the presentation. Now with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. So, you would have seen that we've had a number of sessions going over how policies work, why to use policies, and discussing the overall hierarchy. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but I do want to give some reminders that whenever you are working with policies, there are always policies for every different type that we have within the system. They're provided by ConnectWise. Now, those are the top level global policies that are the first things. They can always be overridden by any of the lower levels within the triangle here. But anytime you're looking at an individual device and you see the word global for the source, that means the policy was provided by ConnectWise to ensure that certain settings and features are not automatically enabled for you. We want it to be an opt-in experience. In addition to that, all of those global policies are able to be overridden at the partner level with a default package and any policies that are contained within that default package. You can also assign packages to sites, or you can assign individual policies via policy groups, which we discussed yesterday, along with being able to do individual device overrides. Now, some of the things that have come up in the past are, why would I use packages versus policy groups? What are some of the pros and cons? And it's not really a pros or cons. They are intended to help complement each other. That said, whenever you are working with policies and you want to get them assigned horizontally across all of your clients, that's whenever packages are really going to be helpful. It helps you make sure that you're able to assign those policy types in one single motion to all devices at a site or to all sites entirely. But there are going to be times where you don't necessarily want those items to be applied uniformly to everyone. It may be by device type, it may be by service offering. Only certain clients may have turned on certain things, but you want to make sure that any client that has this particular option enabled, they have a certain set of policies that are applied to them, and that's whenever policy groups come into play. They really help you give a more targeted and flexible experience to assigning those policies without necessarily having to add them to a package for the entire site or for all of your sites. In addition to that, as a reminder, whenever we talk about policy groups, there are two different ways that you can use policy groups. One is by creating a policy group itself or by reusing an existing dynamic group. Now, there are pros and cons to both of these approaches, and we're going to go through an example today of how to actually troubleshoot some of these things with a recently discovered known issue. Now, you can follow along with me. I'm going to show you how to reproduce this and how to work around it a bit. But that said, dynamic groups are very helpful whenever you're trying to do something that is very flexible, but it does have the risk of unintended changes because those dynamic groups are used in multiple different areas. And people that may have permissions to those dynamic groups could make changes to the group membership at any point in time, which makes them a little less secure. That said, while they are a little less secure, they are more flexible. So some partners do prefer to use those dynamic groups, whereas with the policy groups, they are self-contained within policies and packages themselves, which means that you have little to no risk around those unintended changes because you also have additional permissions. So only users that are given access to policies to make updates to policy groups are able to make changes to those group memberships. So just something to keep in mind whenever you're looking through how to actually be able to determine whether you want to use an existing dynamic group or create your own policy group. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned that we were going to go over some troubleshooting and we were going to reproduce a known issue today. Now, this is in the interest of full transparency. This issue was only discovered yesterday. Now, it is reproducible within the production environment. We have our team investigating it, so I can't comment on how long it is going to exist, but I would not expect this issue to exist for long within production. But for the purposes of today's phone call and session, I think it's good just to be able to go through that and show you how to reproduce this, how to work around it, and some of the troubleshooting steps that go along with it, and the thought process in how this was discovered. Now, this is a wall of text. I'm going to talk through it in a very basic level, but feel free to take a screenshot. If you want to read through it, that's perfectly fine. But I wanted to give some basic information here. Now, we talked about this yesterday whenever we discussed policy groups. A device can only be a part of one policy group for each policy type, meaning that a single device could be in every single policy group that for an individual type across the board. That way you can have something for OS patching for servers, you could have a web root policy, you could have a remote access policy, you can have a PSA integration policy, you can have each of these different items with a device within that particular policy type for a group. That's all intended. However, what we discovered is that whenever you are using an existing dynamic group, if you have that device is a part of multiple dynamic groups, and those dynamic groups span multiple types, well, unfortunately, the device is only going to get one of those policies for some reason. We're still investigating why, but we have the steps to reproduce, and we're actually going to go through in a very kind of a straightforward manner so that you can see what this looks like within our environment, okay? Now, until this issue has been resolved, I do recommend using policy groups instead of existing dynamic groups. But if you're using existing dynamic groups right now and you go through and remove those, you may find an unexpected behavior, which we're also going to discuss here today too. So with that, I'm going to transition over from PowerPoint presentation to the actual environment. So we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Now, yesterday we had talked through being able to create all those different policy groups, and we have them here under one for communicator, one for OS patching for server, and web root integration. Each of these are policy groups with their own specific criteria. And if I go to look at an individual device, I will see that this device is a part of each of those different groups. So at the moment, this device is configured properly. It is inheriting all of the policies from the different groups that we have. But I've also taken that criteria based on custom fields. And what we're going to do here to be able to reproduce this and show you how you can actually force this to happen. That way you can actually go through some of the troubleshooting steps with us. I am going to go and recreate these policy groups as existing dynamic groups. So I've already created these dynamic groups using the same criteria as my policy group. I'm going to add a new one. So we're going to call this one dynamic enable web root. We're going to look for web root. And I'm going to assign a policy. Now, this particular setup mirrors what I already have for the policy group within the same area for this policy type. So whenever I save it, you'll see that it's automatically added and it's added up to the top, because we want to make sure that anytime you are adding policy groups, they always have the highest priority. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, the first group that a device joins, that's where it's going to be inheriting its policies. So even though this particular device that we'll be looking at today is a part of both of these groups, because the dynamic enable web root group was the one that I just created using that dynamic group, that is the one that it's going to be inheriting from. So now that that's been created, I can come over here, and while it may take up to 10 minutes to populate, I feel pretty confident we're going to see a change. So I'll go look at the web root integration. And at the moment, it's saying that it's coming from enable web root. So it hasn't quite gone through yet, but that's okay. We're going to move on and we're going to add our next group. So we have these secondary servers. I'm going to duplicate this. We're going to add existing dynamic group. This is going to be dynamic secondary servers, secondary server patching, and secondary servers. I'll select this, add it, and again, we have one device here, and it's the same device that is a part of the previous group that we created yesterday. So now this one device is a part of two policy types and two different dynamic groups. Whenever I come back over to the device, let's see if these policies have actually cascaded down. I'm going to refresh the screen. And it looks like the changes have not passed through yet, so we may need to wait a few minutes. But while we're waiting, we'll go ahead and create the third one. So we have added to PSA. This is going to be dynamic. Added to PSA. We'll give it a policy. Again, the same policy as the one that was below it. Select. Save. Here we go. So we have duplicates under each of these items. Now, theoretically, if things are working properly, then we will see that this is still going to say group, group, and group. But what we should see is that where it is coming from is from a different group name. So we should see this prefixed with the word dynamic. And we just have to give it a moment to actually allow those changes to get propagated through the system. But at the moment, we have everything configured as we intend. So we're simply waiting for that 10-minute period, which again was discussed yesterday. As you make these changes within the system, it can take up to 10 minutes for the changes to get cascaded throughout. Basically, within policy groups, we're doing something on the back end to ensure that we're reducing the risk of changes immediately affecting devices. Now, while these policies do apply, as soon as they apply, some of them are going to be actually turning on and deploying software for you. And if there's an accidental change, we want to make sure that those devices aren't having software unintentionally deployed or unintentionally removed, especially if we're talking about something regarding AV protection or backup protection. So that's one of the reasons that we have that 10-minute buffer in here, is to help protect the integrity of the systems that we're deploying software to based on the policies that you've applied. So let's give this another refresh. Come back over to settings. Here we go. And now we're seeing something different at the actual device level. So the WebRoot integration is now showing that it's coming from the dynamic enable WebRoot, and communicator is coming from dynamic added to PSA. But for some reason, the OS patching server is not being passed down. Instead, it's being inherited from the partner level. Now, in the example that I gave earlier, I said if it's a part of 2 or more, then you're going to see that inconsistent behavior. Now I've added it to 3 here, so we're seeing that it's a part of 2 of them, but not the first one. So if you are using existing dynamic groups, you may experience inconsistent behavior. Now, while we're going through that process, I am recommending that you use policy groups. But let's go through what it looks like to actually be able to remove those items from the system so that we can make sure that any policy groups that you have created, even if you're just duplicating what already exists, if you're duplicating and they become the higher priority, great, wonderful, you don't have to worry about this. But if you have things ordered differently, you may need to go through and remove some of the groups that you have. So I'm going to start with the dynamic added to PSA. I'm going to remove the assignment because if I attempt to delete it beforehand, It's going to say, hey, you can't delete it because currently you have a policy assigned. So if I remove that assignment, I will delete it. And now for the dynamic secondary servers, I'll remove that assignment and delete it. And for the dynamic enable web root, remove the assignment and delete. Now in theory, after making these changes, if we go back to look at the devices, what we would expect to see is that OS patching from servers would get updated to show it's coming from a group, and it would actually have the policy. All of the communicator and web root integrations, those policies would still stay the same, but they would be coming from a different group. So let's give this a refresh and see if this is actually propagated through. And what we're seeing now, after I removed each of those groups, the system is simply saying none of them are coming from groups. So if you go through and remove those existing dynamic groups from your policy groups, what you're going to see is those changes are not getting propagated. And if I sit here and wait for 10 minutes, it's still not going to propagate. What you actually want to do is whenever you are removing those groups, go into one of the existing ones that's still there, give it an edit. I'm just going to make a small tweak. I added a space to the name and deleted the space. That way it recognizes that some change was made. I'll click save. And now, if we come back over to the device, select settings, we kicked off a recalculation of all the policies. So now, communicator is inheriting from added PSA. OS patching from servers is inheriting from secondary servers, and the web root integration is inheriting from enable web root. So these are some of the troubleshooting steps that you can use. Just be aware that as you are removing groups, sometimes after you've made all those removals, you want to trigger a recalculation. That's something that we are looking to add as an enhancement so that whenever you remove groups, it triggers a recalculation for you. But until that enhancement has been added in, just go into an existing group that you have, make a minor change, add a space, delete a space. That way you can trick the system into thinking that you actually made a modification. Click save, and that will trigger the recalculation and the recascading of all the policies down to your devices. Now with that, I'm going to say that this is probably a good time for any questions that have been posted. We'll get to those in just a second. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to hand it off to my Director of Product Management, Amit Mehta, to discuss agent deployment and some of the troubleshooting. Because last week, whenever we had Thursday session, there were some technical difficulties that we had. So today we're going to cover that as a bit of a bonus. So Amit, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, CJ. And once again, I would like to apologize for the last week where we couldn't complete the webinar about the mastering of the RMM agent deployments and so on. So let's go through this today, and we'll cover this out. Now, I have a live demo also where we can see the common troubleshooting and how you could make things better with the RMM agent deployment. So let's get started. The first off with this, TJ, if you can just move to the next screen, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, so first things first, with the agent installation, there are a couple of things that we recommend, which is starting with the prerequisites, which is we need disk space. There should be PowerShell 3.0 installed on a Windows endpoint, and the OS compatibility. I'll post the required URLs at the end of the session. There are some QR codes that we can provide it to you that shows all the operating systems for both client and server in that are supported by the agent. So that's another prerequisite to check. Most importantly, as the agent communicates with the ConnectWise systems, we need to make sure that the firewall exclusions are in place. Majority of the times that we have seen during the troubleshooting, the agent is not communicating, or it's showing offline, though the device is online. These eventually ends up to be a firewall issue that's causing issues. Additionally, as the agent is also capturing some data and posting information, sometimes the AV solutions, they detect that as a malware and wants to kind of block that or quarantine those executables. So we also strongly recommend to add the agent folders into the exclusion list so the agent is free to capture and process the information as expected. From a disk space perspective, it just needs a very few, like 200 megabytes for the installation on the drive overall for data collection and processing of that data. Now, one of the most important part that we have improved is using tokens. So at the end, when we are done with these slides, we'll move to the demo side of it. I'll show that you could download this setup and there are tokens made available. Tokens are pretty much similar to licenses by which the system understands what company and what site does this endpoint needs to represent to. And I'll show you a trick by which you don't need to download and store setups for each and every site. Instead, you could just have one site and a spreadsheet or something that has all the tokens for each of the sites. So you could actually insert the token during the installation process and try to make it easier for the deployment of agent across all your endpoints. Moving next, when we process the agent and the installation gets completed, there are certain data collections that happen. The most common part of the data collection is the performance data. So we collect CPU, disk, memory, the asset information. There is the AV identification. We do the deployments and stuff. So one of the things that you notice within the overall setup, we keep talking about the platform agent. Platform agent is a common setup that is used within ConnectWise's ecosystem for RMM, for security, and we are slowly and steadily expanding it to the other products as well. So what it means is we only want to have partners use one single setup, and that one single setup would practically deploy additional features and functions based on what's enabled at the site level. Now, sometimes we do get partners reporting issues where the performance data doesn't show up. So I'd like to bring it up over here that is usually when the performance counters are not responding or they're not in the right shape, kind of corrupted. So there are certain commands that's put up over here, which helps us to resolve those issues. And again, from a data collection perspective of it, we keep collecting these data information every 3 minutes to make the entire agent operate and function in real time. For asset information and other changes that are detected, like events, they are collected and processed in under 2 seconds as soon as they are being identified on the endpoint. The registry, the file system, the folder hierarchies, and all of that, that's being managed again in the real-time fashion. Moving ahead, the other part that usually comes down is the uninstallation of the agent. Now, once the agent has been installed, it starts collecting the data, but for some reason, if you would like to uninstall the agent, our recommended approach is to remove it from the portal. So we have options right from the devices page where you could select certain devices and just remove it from there, or in case if there is no network available or the device doesn't have options to connect it to the ConnectWise data center, we have a command line available that can be utilized to remove the agent. Now, one of the things that we do with the agent is something what we call agent tamper protection. Now, agent is a critical component, and as partners use this to reliably monitor the endpoints, we don't want users who have administrative rights to go ahead and change configurations and remove the agent or tamper with that. That's why we call it agent tamper protection. One of the things we do with that is basically we hide that from the admin programs. So even if the user has an administrative rights to perform transactions or actions on the endpoint, you wouldn't be able to see the agent. The agent services are being put into tamper protection so that they can't be directly stopped or altered on the endpoint. In such cases, we have a command line that's available in the Doc Center, and again, I can provide those links at the end to the QR code. What the command line would basically do is it will gracefully stop the agent and flag the uninstallation actions and send that over to the backend. It'll perform the full cleanup as it's supposed to happen on the endpoints as well. So for uninstallation, recommended portal first thing. And in case if you don't like, you would like to remove it from the endpoint itself, there's a command line action that can perform to completely stop or block the agent from performing or making any changes on the endpoint. All right, we move next. Next up ahead is the documentation piece of it. So I'm gonna quickly try sharing my screen and give you a live demo here.
Go right ahead.
Thanks.
Is it allowing you to take control?
It is. It's somehow cleared up for me.
Here, I'll stop sharing my screen. Maybe that'll assist.
Yeah.
There we go, make presenter.
Both my screen is visible. I'm sharing the right screen. It is? Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you so much, CJ. So we talked about the agent downloads, and the agent download is available right under the manage button. It says agent download. And when you notice, it prompts you for picking up your site. And whichever site I pick up, you will first see there is a token. And this is the token that I was referring to earlier that allows you to basically copy that. This is the license to deploy the agent under this particular site. So either you could copy the token and save it yourself, or you can directly do the downloads. Here are the links that basically provides all the information about the target endpoints that are supported by the agent. I really have a quick endpoint that I've created, and just to save some time, I've downloaded the setups here for you. So first, I'm going to try. What I've done here is I've downloaded the setup. I've renamed the setup. So one thing that you notice when the agents are downloaded, it also embeds the token in the file. So here's for the Acme Limited. If I go back here and look at this, the token is going to be the same. Is the W64. Now, what I did for this demo here, I've just renamed this setup here to a regular file name. I call it a standard setup. And if I just going to double click that, it's going to initiate the installation process. It's just the wizard. I'm just running it through the GUI, and I select the configurations, and that's where it's going to halt, and it's going to request me for the token. So unless you don't provide the token, the agent doesn't understand which client and site does it needs to represent. I would not be allowed to proceed further. It will prompt me to enter a token. Either I could copy the token from the file that I have, or I could just copy it right from the portal instances and deploy it. So I'm just going to cancel this part. But the important part that I wanted to show up over here was, one, the setup is very common for every client inside. The token kind of drives the installation and maps it to the respective company and site where it belongs to. But on the other hand, if you would like to pass that installation link to one of your clients or a user on the endpoint, and you don't want to just pass it separate token for the installation and things like that, in that case, the browser allows you to copy the URL. So if you just copy the URL and directly put it in the browser, it'll initiate the download process immediately. There you go. Here's the download process getting initiated. So these links are pretty much open, doesn't require authentication. So a user could also download that on their endpoints. So what I've done here is the file, how it's getting downloaded on the machine. I'm going to double click the file. and initiate the installation process. So everything remains the same, like the process of accepting the agreement, moving into the defining the location where I'm installing it. But if you notice the token, it doesn't show up a space where you could insert the token, but it just basically allows you to continue and click on the next button, which completes the setup or installation process here. The installation process is very quick. It takes less than a minute to complete the overall installation part. And as soon as the installation is completed, the endpoint does start reflecting back on the Azure instance. So the installation part I'll cover. It does completely install the platform setup. Again, when I refer to the platform setup, it's a small compressed version of the agent. The compressed agent would install. It creates a folder, yeah, ITS platform folder. That's where the agent installation happens. Plugins are all the additional components that are being utilized. So as soon as the agent is installed, there are a couple of things that it does. Number one, it will perform a self-update, which means even if you have an older setup, which is a couple of months old, don't need to worry. You don't need to keep downloading the new setups and keep installing or maintaining it for yourself. The same setup basically works across any endpoint, and the first thing it do is it will do the update. Once the update is processed on that particular endpoint, all the additional components based on the site enablement, you want to use that particular site for RMM, you want to use it for security, you'll just grab all the necessary components and as CJ was mentioning about the policies and packages, based on what the packages are applied at the site level, the necessary components based on the endpoint. So we also scan the entire endpoint, bringing out what all applications and features are available over there. It just shows up right there itself. So here, as I've got the agent installed, I have about 102 devices. The reflection of the agent back on the Azure instance is also pretty quick. It takes less than 2 to 3 minutes, and the 102 devices is now 103 devices. So this was the newest agent that I've installed for the Acme Limited. And as you see, the basic inventory data is being captured. The performance data would be captured at every 3 minutes iteration. You should be able to see the full data. You can go back and also expand that to additional days as you need it to just plot the overall CPU and memory data. Now, one thing it does here with a special icon here is against the type. So the agent is smart. What I mean by smart is it auto detects the type of the endpoint, and based on that, it automatically maps it to a server or a desktop. Now, in certain cases where you don't have server endpoints at a site, you could practically make any of the desktop machines in a server. You just need to click on this little icon. It prompts you that you would like to switch this to a server, and clicking on it, it will convert that agent to a setup of a server machine instead of showing up as a desktop machine. Back in the past, you would need to uninstall and reinstall the agent on the machine to convert from a server to a desktop or a desktop to a server. It's now pretty much convenient where you could just do it by a click of a button. Now, if you see, all the additional information is now captured. If I go to the inventory section, the inventory data is being captured. As I mentioned, all the data is processed and captured in near real-time fashion. All of the data is made available here. Now, there are some of the additional features that you could enable against the agent. So you just select the endpoint. You could go ahead and make it an endpoint where you could use it for gateway cache, for distributing patches and other functions over there. There's the RMM scanning tool. You can send messages, you can uninstall the agent, or even you can move the agent from one site to another. You don't need to manually move that machine by removing and reinstalling it again. For the uninstallation of the agent, it's pretty simple and quick. Select the option. It prompts you here. It's like the reason, and boom. When you click the machine, it is going to start the installation process. The data collection and processing of that particular machine done in the agent to remove this activity is performed every 10 seconds. So Within another 10-15 seconds, the agent uninstallation process should be invoked and it should start removing the agent completely from the machine. With that, I'll open up for any live questions. If there are any, I can try and answer those things for you and make things easy for the agent.
So far, no questions around the agent deployment or uninstallation troubleshooting. We have had a few questions pop up regarding some other items, but for anyone who has not had their questions answered, please feel free to post into the chat. And we are taking those questions live at this point in time.
Yeah. Thanks, CJ, for answering some of the questions that came from the demo.
So let's switch back to the PowerPoint and choose the screen. All right. Hopefully you're able to see my screen now. Excellent. So as a recap, today we've gone over policies and packages. We actually reproduced an issue for being able to kind of see how things are happening with dynamic groups, but it gave us an opportunity to really go through the troubleshooting steps of identifying an issue and how to work around it, along with what happens whenever you remove policy groups and trying to trigger that recalculation of the policies for all of your devices. But please feel free to refer to the documentation. We have the QR codes available here for both policies and packages, along with the agent prerequisites. Amit went over a number of different items for being able to troubleshoot both the installation and uninstallation of those devices, which was extremely helpful. Now, this is really the final call for any other questions that any of our attendees may have at this time. We'll leave the session open, so if you have a question but you haven't quite typed it all in, just type something real quick and hit enter, and we will wait for that question to get posted. We'll give you about 6 seconds. And I'm not seeing any new questions popped up, not even an okay or wait. So with that, thank you all very much for joining today. It was a pleasure to be able to spend time with you. And if we don't see you tomorrow, hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.